The gunshot shattered the tranquil afternoon air of Sierra Valley, California, sending birds scattering from the ponderosa pines as Catherine O'Malley crashed through the underbrush, her lungs burning and her skirts torn from brambles that clawed at her like the men who pursued her. It was 1876, and the wilderness of the Sierra Nevada foothills offered both peril and promise to a woman alone, especially one carrying secrets that powerful men would kill to keep hidden. Behind her, the shouts of her pursuers grew closer. 3 men, hired guns from the mining company, had tracked her from Sacramento after she'd witnessed their employer ordering the murder of a union organizer. Catherine had been working as a seamstress in the hotel where the deed was planned, and her only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. "There she is," a gruff voice called out, too close for comfort. "Don't let her get away." Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs as she pushed deeper into the forest. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, wild tendrils sticking to her sweat-dampened face. She glanced back, a fatal error as her boot caught on an exposed root, sending her tumbling down a small embankment. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to regain her footing. The sound of a rifle being cocked froze her in place, but the shot that followed wasn't aimed at her. It cracked overhead, splintering bark from a tree near where her pursuers had appeared at the top of the ridge. "That's far enough, gentlemen," a deep voice commanded. Catherine whirled around to see a tall figure on horseback emerging from the trees. Sunlight glinted off his badge, a sheriff's star, though he looked more outlaw than lawman with his weathered duster and the bandana covering the lower half of his face. His eyes, blue as a summer sky, locked with hers for a breathtaking moment before returning to the men on the ridge. "This woman is under my protection," he announced, leveling his Winchester rifle at them. "State your business or ride on." The 3 men exchanged glances. The leader, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, spat on the ground. "We're collecting a thief, Sheriff. She stole from our employer in Sacramento." "That's a lie," Catherine cried out, finding her voice at last. "I witnessed Mr. Hargrove order a killing, and now they've come to silence me." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Without taking his gaze from the men, he extended his gloved hand toward Catherine. "Madam, if you're claiming sanctuary in Sierra City, I suggest you take my hand. Now." Catherine hesitated only a moment before reaching up to grasp his offered hand. In one fluid motion, he pulled her up behind him on the horse, her arms instinctively circling his waist. "This ain't over, Sheriff," the scarred man warned. "That woman's trouble, and Hargrove Mining doesn't take kindly to interference." "Neither do I," the lawman replied coolly, raising his rifle again. "Sierra City is my jurisdiction, and I decide who's welcome here. You boys have 10 seconds to turn around before I decide you're trespassing with intent to commit violence." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring before the leader finally signaled to his men. They backed away slowly, disappearing into the trees with murderous glares and muttered threats. "They'll be back," Catherine whispered, her breath warm against the sheriff's shoulder. "I'm counting on it," he replied, turning his horse toward town. "I've been looking for a reason to investigate Hargrove Mining for months. Seems like you just handed me one, miss." "Catherine O'Malley," she answered, still clinging to him as the horse navigated the uneven terrain. "And you are?" He pulled down the bandana, revealing a strong jawline peppered with stubble and a mouth that curved into the barest hint of a smile. "Thomas Dawson, Sheriff of Sierra City." He glanced back at her, his expression sobering. "Now, why don't you tell me exactly what kind of hornet's nest you've stirred up, Miss O'Malley?" Catherine's grip on his waist tightened as she realized she'd fled one danger only to ride straight into another for the truth she carried. could bring the wrath of Hargrove mining down on this entire town. And yet, something about Sheriff Dawson's unwavering gaze told her that perhaps, just perhaps, she'd finally found an ally in her desperate flight for justice. Sierra City came into view as they crested a hill, nestled in a valley embraced by towering pines and rugged mountains. It wasn't large, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the rooftops, and scattered houses spreading outward like ripples in a pond. Mining equipment dotted the landscape, evidence of the industry that had brought people flocking to this remote corner of California. "It's not much," Thomas remarked, noting Catherine's curious gaze, "but it's home." "It looks peaceful," she said, the word tasting foreign on her tongue after weeks of looking over her shoulder. Thomas made a non-committal sound. "Appearances can be deceiving, Miss O'Malley. We have our share of troubles, especially since Hargrove Mining started buying up claims and pushing out independent miners." As they rode down the main street, Catherine felt the weight of stares from townsfolk going about their business. A woman riding behind the sheriff, disheveled and clutching him like a lifeline, was bound to raise eyebrows in a small town. "Where are we going?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "My office first. Need to get your statement while everything's fresh in your mind." He tipped his hat to an elderly man sweeping outside the general store. "Then we'll see about finding you somewhere safe to stay." The sheriff's office was a modest wooden structure with a small jail attached to the back. Thomas dismounted with practiced ease, then reached up to help Catherine down. When her feet touched the ground, her injured ankle buckled beneath her. Thomas caught her before she could fall, his strong hand steadying her waist. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," she insisted, though she couldn't hide her wince. "Just twisted my ankle when I fell." His expression softened with concern. "Let's get you inside and take a look at it." The office was neat and utilitarian, a desk piled with wanted posters and correspondence, a gun rack on the wall, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and a small window that looked out onto the main street. Thomas helped Catherine to a chair, then rummaged through a cabinet and produced a tin of salve. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her ankle. Catherine hesitated, then nodded, lifting her skirt just enough to expose her ankle. The flesh was already swelling, an angry reddish purple spreading beneath her skin. Thomas gently removed her boot and examined the injury. "Not broken, I don't think, but a bad sprain." His touch was surprisingly tender for such calloused hands. "This salve might help with the swelling." "Doc Murphy's out at the Bennett place delivering a baby, but I can fetch him later." As he applied the salve, Catherine studied him openly for the first time. Sheriff Thomas Dawson was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he had in her presence so far. His dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar, and a small scar bisected one eyebrow. "How long have you been sheriff?" she asked, partly from curiosity and partly to distract herself from the pain. 3 years, he replied, focused on his task. "Came here after the war, worked as a deputy until the old sheriff retired." He glanced up, catching her gaze. "Now, Miss O'Malley, I believe you owe me an explanation about why Hargrove Mining's men are so keen on finding you." Catherine's throat tightened. She'd been running for so long that the truth felt dangerous even to speak aloud. But this man had risked himself to protect her without knowing her story. She owed him honesty. 2 weeks ago, I was working as a seamstress at the Grand Hotel in Sacramento. I was delivering a mended jacket to a guest's room when I overheard voices through the connecting door to the adjacent suite. She twisted her hands in her lap. The door was slightly ajar, and I recognized one of the voices as William Hargrove. He'd been pointed out to me by another maid as one of the wealthiest men in California. Thomas finished bandaging her ankle and sat back, giving her his full attention. "Go on." Hargrove was arguing with someone. He said, "I don't care how you do it. Just make sure Cooper disappears permanently. That union talk is spreading, and I won't have my workers getting ideas about fair wages and safety measures." Catherine shuddered at the memory. The other man, I couldn't see his face, said something about making it look like an accident in the mines. "James Cooper?" Thomas asked sharply. "Union organizer from San Francisco," Catherine nodded. "Yes, he was murdered 3 days later in a mining accident near Placerville. The newspapers called it a tragic cave-in, but I knew better." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Somehow Hargrove discovered I'd overheard. His men came to the hotel looking for me. I barely escaped with the clothes on my back." Thomas stood and paced the length of the office, his brow furrowed in thought. "Hargrove Mining has been trying to buy up every claim around here, forcing out smaller operations. Those who refuse to sell have been plagued with accidents and sabotage." He turned to face her. "Your testimony could be the key to stopping them, but it won't be easy. Hargrove has judges and politicians in his pocket." "I know," Catherine said wearily. "That's why I've been running. I tried going to the authorities in Sacramento, but the sheriff there practically handed me over to Hargrove's men. I've been traveling north ever since, staying off the main roads." Thomas leaned against his desk, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "Why not just keep running? You could have headed east, lost yourself in a big city where no one would find you." "Because men like Hargrove don't stop," she replied, her chin lifting defiantly. "If not me, they'll silence someone else. Someone has to stand against them." A slow smile spread across Thomas's face, transforming his features. "Miss O'Malley, I believe you might be the bravest woman I've met in these parts." He reached for his hat. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me. I'm going to arrange for a safe place for you to stay and gather a few supplies." "You believe me then?" she asked, unable to mask her surprise. "I've been a lawman long enough to recognize truth when I hear it," he replied. "And Hargrove's tactics have troubled me for some time. I just haven't had the evidence to act." He paused at the door. "You've handed me something precious, Miss O'Malley, a chance for justice. I don't intend to waste it." After Thomas left, Catherine locked the door as instructed and limped to the window. Sierra City bustled with afternoon activity, miners returning from their claims, women shopping, children playing in the dusty street. It looked so normal, so peaceful. How quickly that peace would shatter if Hargrove's men returned in force. She rubbed her arms against a sudden chill. She'd brought danger to this town, and to the sheriff, who'd risked himself to help her. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders as she watched the sun begin its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. Whatever came next, Catherine knew one thing for certain: her days of running were over. For better or worse, Sierra City would be where she made her stand. Thomas returned after dusk had settled over the town, his arms laden with parcels. Catherine had dozed off in the chair, exhaustion finally claiming her after days of vigilant flight. The soft click of the door awakened her with a start. "Easy," Thomas said, setting his burdens on the desk. "Just me." Catherine straightened, wincing as she accidentally jostled her injured ankle. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to fall asleep." "Nothing to apologize for, you're safe here." He unwrapped one of the parcels, revealing a modest cotton dress, a shawl, and other necessities. "Mrs. Abernathy from the Mercantile sent these. She's about your size, and I explained you'd lost your belongings in. Well, I might have mentioned a stagecoach robbery." "You lied for me?" Catherine asked, touched by his consideration. Let's call it a strategic omission of facts. Thomas's eyes crinkled at the corners. The fewer people who know your true situation right now, the safer you'll be. He produced a cloth-wrapped bundle that smelled deliciously of fresh bread and roasted meat. Supper from the hotel dining room. Eat, then we'll get you settled. Catherine hadn't realized how famished she was until the aroma of food reached her. She ate gratefully while Thomas filled her in on his arrangements. There's a small cabin on the edge of my property, about a half-mile from town. It's modest but secure. My deputy, Marcus, will take the night watch here in town, and I'll stay at the main house to keep an eye on you. He hesitated. It's not ideal, but it sounds perfect, Catherine interrupted, relief evident in her voice. I'm grateful, truly. After she'd eaten and changed into the fresh dress behind a privacy screen Thomas had thoughtfully erected, they slipped out the back door of the sheriff's office. A wagon waited in the alley, and Thomas helped her onto the seat before climbing up beside her. The cabin was indeed small but well built and clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple furnishings: a bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair near the hearth filled the cozy space. Thomas lit a lamp and stoked the fire he'd apparently prepared earlier. It was my mother's weaving room, he explained, watching Catherine take in her surroundings. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to clear it out until recently. A shadow crossed his face. Been meaning to find a purpose for it. It's lovely, Catherine said softly. Thank you. Thomas cleared his throat. The main house is just through those trees. If you need anything, day or night, don't hesitate. He pointed to a shotgun mounted above the door. That's loaded. Do you know how to use it? My father taught me, she confirmed, before he died in the war. Thomas nodded, seemingly satisfied. I'll come by at first light. Try to get some rest, Miss O'Malley. Catherine, she corrected him. Please, after everything, I think we can dispense with formalities. A smile tugged at his lips. Catherine, then, and I'm Thomas to my friends. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, but paused at the door. I meant what I said earlier. What you're doing standing up to Hargrove, it takes courage, or foolishness, she replied with a rueful smile. Sometimes they are the same thing. His expression turned serious. We'll figure this out together. I promise. After he left, Catherine barred the door and sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the day. She'd gone from running for her life to finding an unexpected ally in this quiet mountain town. Sheriff Thomas Dawson was unlike anyone she'd ever met, principled and kind, but with a steely resolve that suggested he was a formidable opponent when crossed. For the first time in weeks, Catherine allowed herself to hope. Perhaps here, with Thomas's help, she could finally stop running and start fighting back. Perhaps here, she could find justice for James Cooper and all the others Hargrove had harmed. Perhaps here, she could finally find peace. With that comforting thought, she drifted into the first truly restful sleep she'd had since fleeing Sacramento. Dawn broke clear and crisp over the Sierra Nevada foothills, sunlight filtering through the pines to dapple the cabin floor with golden patterns. Catherine woke to the sound of birds and the distant clang of the mine shift bell. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, panic rising in her throat until memory returned: the chase, the sheriff's intervention, the sanctuary of this small cabin. A soft knock at the door startled her. She hastily smoothed her hair and adjusted her borrowed dress before calling out, "Who is it?" "Thomas," came the reply. "Brought breakfast and some news." Catherine unbarred the door to find the sheriff standing on the porch, hat in hand, a basket over one arm. He looked fresher than the previous day, clean-shaven and wearing a blue shirt that matched his eyes almost perfectly. "Good morning," she greeted him, suddenly self-conscious of her rumpled appearance. "Please come in." Thomas crossed the threshold, glancing around as if to reassure himself nothing had changed overnight. "Sleep well, better than I have in weeks," she admitted, taking the basket he offered. Inside were warm biscuits, preserves, and a pot of coffee still steaming beneath its cloth covering. "This is too kind. Housekeeper's doing, not mine," he confessed with a smile. "Mrs. Finch has been with me since I became sheriff. She's curious about my guest, but knows better than to pry." Catherine set the basket on the table and gestured for him to sit. "You mentioned news." Thomas's expression sobered as he took a seat. "My deputy rode out at first light to check the trails. Hargrove's men are still in the area, camped about 5 miles east. Looks like they're waiting for reinforcements." Catherine's appetite vanished. "I've brought trouble to your doorstep." "Trouble was already here," Thomas corrected, pouring coffee for them both. "Hargrove Mining has been squeezing this community for months. Independent miners going broke, mysterious accidents, threats against those who won't sell." He stirred sugar into his cup. "What you've given us is a chance to fight back with real evidence." "A witness testimony is hardly concrete evidence," Catherine pointed out. "Especially from a woman with no standing against a man like William Hargrove." "It's a start," Thomas insisted. "And there's more. I sent telegrams last night to contacts in Sacramento and San Francisco. James Cooper's death wasn't the first suspicious accident connected to Hargrove. There's been a pattern, but no one's been willing to connect the dots officially." Hope flickered in Catherine's chest. "So there might be others willing to speak out, if they believe it's safe to do so." Thomas leaned forward, his expression earnest. "That's why protecting you is crucial. You're the key that could unlock this whole conspiracy." Catherine wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "What's your plan?" "First, keep you hidden while we gather more evidence. I've asked my friend at the territorial newspaper to quietly investigate Hargrove's finances and political connections." He took a sip of coffee. "Second, reach out to a federal marshal I trust. Corruption this extensive might require federal intervention." "And in the meantime?" Catherine asked, acutely aware that Hargrove's men were closer than she'd like. "In the meantime, we wait and prepare." Thomas stood and crossed to the window, scanning the tree line with practiced vigilance. "I've deputized a few trusted men to patrol the town borders. If Hargrove's men show themselves, we'll be ready." Catherine joined him at the window, her shoulder nearly touching his as they gazed out at the forest. "I can't hide in this cabin forever, Thomas." He turned to face her, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "No, you can't, and I wouldn't ask you to." His voice softened. "But I need you to trust me for a few days. Give me time to build a stronger case." Something in his expression, the unwavering conviction, the genuine concern, compelled her to nod. "I trust you." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you." He stepped back, breaking the moment of unexpected intimacy. "Your ankle looks better. How does it feel?" Catherine tested her weight on it. "Still sore, but much improved." "Good. Doc Murphy should be back in town by now. I'd like him to have a look at it." Thomas hesitated. "If you're up for a short ride, we could visit his office this morning. Might do you good to get out of this cabin for a bit." "I'd like that," Catherine agreed, suddenly eager for fresh air and a change of scenery despite the risks. Thomas's smile returned. "Eat your breakfast first, Mrs. Finch will have my hide if you don't appreciate her cooking." They shared the meal in companionable conversation, Thomas filling her in on Sierra City's history and characters. Catherine found herself laughing at his stories of local eccentrics and frontier justice, momentarily forgetting the danger that hovered at the edges of this peaceful interlude. As Thomas described the annual Founders' Day celebration with animated gestures, Catherine studied him with growing admiration. Here was a man who truly cared about his community, who took his responsibilities seriously, without losing his sense of humor or humanity. In another time, another place without the shadow of Hargrove looming over them, she might have allowed herself to acknowledge the fluttering sensation his smile evoked in her chest. But such thoughts were luxuries she couldn't afford, not with so much at stake. After breakfast, Thomas brought his horse around and they rode double into town, Catherine seated behind him as she had been the day before. This time, however, the journey lacked the desperate urgency of their first meeting. She was acutely aware of his solid presence before her, the strength in his back as she held his waist, the scent of pine soap and leather that clung to him. Sierra City looked different in the morning light, more welcoming, less threatening. Storekeepers swept their boardwalks, miners headed to their claims, and children raced to the small schoolhouse at the end of the street. Several people called greetings to the sheriff, curious glances lingering on Catherine. "Folks are wondering who you are," Thomas murmured over his shoulder. "Small towns run on gossip. What should I tell them if they ask?" she questioned. "For now, you're Catherine O'Malley, a friend who's staying with me after losing her belongings in a robbery." He guided the horse toward a neat clapboard building with Dr. A. Murphy painted on a shingle above the door. The less detail, the better. Dr. Murphy proved to be a jovial Irishman with white whiskers and kind eyes. He examined Catherine's ankle with gentle efficiency, pronouncing it a moderate sprain that would heal with proper rest. "Keep it wrapped and elevated when you can," he advised, applying a fresh bandage. "And use that salve the sheriff gave you. His mother's recipe was better than half my medicines." "You knew Thomas's mother?" Catherine asked, curious about the sheriff's background. "Knew her." "I delivered the boy himself," Dr. Murphy chuckled. "Sarah Dawson was a remarkable woman, came out here with her husband during the gold rush of '49, started a successful weaving business using natural dyes from local plants." His expression sobered. "She raised Thomas alone after his father was killed in a mine collapse. Taught him to be the man he is today." Catherine glanced at Thomas, who was pretending great interest in the doctor's collection of medical texts. A flush had crept up his neck at this personal history being shared so freely. "She sounds wonderful," Catherine said softly. "That she was," Dr. Murphy agreed. "This town lost something precious when she passed 3 winters ago." He finished securing the bandage. "They're now good as new, just mind you don't go dancing for a week or so." As they left the doctor's office, Thomas suggested a brief tour of the town. "Since we're here anyway," he reasoned, "might as well let people see you in the daylight, less suspicious than keeping you hidden away." They walked slowly down the main street, Thomas shortening his stride to accommodate her limp. He pointed out the establishments with pride: the general store, the assay office, the hotel with its attached restaurant, the modest bank. "Sierra City isn't much compared to Sacramento," he acknowledged, "but we've managed to build something good here, at least until Hargrove started meddling." Catherine observed the easy way Thomas interacted with his townspeople, stopping to help an elderly woman with her parcels, ruffling the hair of a young boy who ran up to show him a carved wooden horse, exchanging respectful nods with the men outside the saloon. These people trusted him, relied on him for protection and justice, and he had risked their goodwill, perhaps even their safety, to help her. The weight of that responsibility pressed on Catherine as they completed their circuit of the town. "Your people care for you," she noted as they headed back toward his horse. "And I for them," he replied simply. "That's the job. Is that why you became a sheriff? Duty?" Thomas considered the question as he helped her mount. "Partly." After the war, I saw too much lawlessness, too many people taking advantage of chaos to prey on the vulnerable. He swung up behind her, reversing their positions so she sat before him in the saddle. I wanted to build something better, protect what my parents had helped create here. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, and Catherine found herself leaning back slightly into his chest, drawing comfort from his proximity. It's a noble calling. Most days, he agreed, his breath warm against her ear. Some days it's just breaking up fights at the saloon and chasing after rustlers. Their easy conversation continued as they rode back toward the cabin, but as they crested the final hill, Thomas suddenly pulled the horse to a halt, his body tensing against hers. "What's wrong?" Catherine asked, alarm racing through her. Thomas's arm tightened around her waist as he turned the horse sharply off the trail. Smoke, coming from the direction of the cabin. Catherine strained to see through the trees, and her heart sank when she spotted the thin column of gray rising above the pines. Hargrove's men, possibly. Thomas's voice had lost all its warmth, replaced by steely determination. "Hold tight." He urged the horse into a controlled trot through the forest, approaching the cabin from an angle that kept them concealed among the trees. When they were close enough, Thomas dismounted and helped Catherine down, pressing a finger to his lips for silence. Drawing his revolver, he led her through the underbrush until they had a clear view of the cabin. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. The cabin door hung open, splintered near the lock. A man in a dusty black coat stood on the porch, smoking a cigar as he watched two others ransack the interior. Even from this distance, Catherine recognized the scarred face of the leader who had pursued her through the forest. "How did they find it?" she whispered. "Someone in town must have talked," Thomas replied grimly, "or they followed our trail." He checked his revolver. "Stay here. When I engage them, circle around to the main house if you can. Mrs. Finch will hide you." Catherine clutched his arm. "You can't face 3 armed men alone." The corner of his mouth quirked up in a tense smile. "I've faced worse odds." He squeezed her hand. "Trust me, remember." Before she could protest further, Thomas slipped away through the trees, circling to approach the cabin from another angle. Catherine watched, heart pounding, as he positioned himself behind a large pine with a clear line of sight to the porch. The crack of a twig made her freeze. Slowly, she turned to find herself staring into the barrel of a pistol held by a fourth man she hadn't spotted, a lanky figure with cold eyes and a week's growth of beard. "Well now," he drawled, "look what I found while scouting the perimeter. The boss will be mighty pleased." Catherine's mind raced. If she screamed to warn Thomas, she'd give away his position, an element of surprise. If she didn't, this man would drag her to his companions and Thomas would still be outnumbered. She made her decision in an instant, lashing out with her good foot to kick the man's knee. He howled in pain, his pistol discharging harmlessly into the air as he stumbled. Catherine seized the moment to shove him with all her strength, sending him crashing backward into a thicket of brambles. The gunshot alerted both Thomas and the men at the cabin. Catherine heard shouts, then the distinct report of Thomas's revolver. More gunfire followed as she scrambled away from her attacker, who was cursing and struggling to free himself from the thorny embrace of the brambles. She ran as best she could with her injured ankle, heading for the main house as Thomas had instructed, but the uneven ground and pain slowed her progress. Behind her, the gunfight continued. 3 shots, then 2 more, then silence. The silence terrified her more than the gunfire. Catherine reached the edge of the clearing where Thomas's house stood, a handsome 2-story structure with a wide porch and neatly tended garden. She was about to make a dash for the door when a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. She struggled violently until a familiar voice whispered, "Easy." "It's me, Thomas." Alive, relief made her knees weak as he released her. She turned to find him breathing hard, a bloody scratch across his cheek but otherwise unharmed. "Are they?" she began. "One dead. One wounded and unconscious, the other two ran." Thomas kept his revolver ready as he scanned the tree line. "We need to move. They'll be back with reinforcements." "Where will we go?" "I've got a friend with a place up in the high country. Old trapper named Josiah. They'd need an army to find us there." Thomas took her elbow, guiding her toward the house. "We'll get supplies and leave before sunset." Mrs. Finch, a stout, gray-haired woman with a permanently worried expression, was already packing provisions when they entered the kitchen. "Heard the shots," she explained, stuffing bread and jerky into a canvas bag. "Figured trouble had found you as usual." "You're a treasure, Mrs. Finch," Thomas said with genuine affection. "When Deputy Marcus returns, tell him to send the telegram we discussed and then keep a low profile. If Hargrove's men come looking, you don't know where I've gone." "Been keeping your secrets for years, Sheriff," she sniffed, adding a jar of preserves to the bag. "Not about to start blabbing now." She cast an appraising glance at Catherine. "This the young lady causing all the fuss?" "Catherine O'Malley," Thomas introduced her. "Catherine, this is Mrs. Finch, the closest thing to a mother I have these days." "Pleased to meet you, madam," Catherine said, feeling oddly as if she were being evaluated. Mrs. Finch harumphed. "Pretty thing. Hope she's worth the trouble." She thrust the packed supplies at Thomas. Extra ammunition in the side pocket, wrapped a clean shirt around it. Thomas leaned down to kiss the older woman's cheek. "Thank you. Stay safe." "You're the one rushing into danger as usual," Mrs. Finch muttered, but her eyes were soft with worry. "Godspeed to you both." They left through the back door, where Thomas had already saddled a second horse, a sturdy bay mare that nuzzled Catherine's hand when she approached. "This is Penny," Thomas told her as he helped her mount. "She's gentle and sure-footed, perfect for mountain trails." They rode hard for the first hour, following game trails and shallow streams to obscure their tracks. Catherine's ankle throbbed with every hoofbeat, but she bit back any complaint. Thomas led them ever upward, into more rugged terrain where pine forests gave way to rocky outcroppings and sweeping vistas of the valleys below. As twilight descended, they reached a narrow pass between two sheer cliffs. Thomas dismounted to lead his horse through the tight space, gesturing for Catherine to do the same. "Almost there," he promised. "Josiah's cabin is just beyond this pass." The pass opened onto a small plateau nestled against the mountainside. A log cabin with a stone chimney stood near a crystal-clear spring, smoke curling from its chimney. As they approached, the door swung open and a figure stepped out with a shotgun raised. "That's far enough," called a gruff voice. "It's Thomas Dawson, Josiah," Thomas called back. "Remember that favor you owe me," the shotgun lowered. "Thomas." "Well, I'll be." The figure stepped into the fading light, revealing a lean man with a long gray beard and weathered face. "Didn't expect to see you up here, Sheriff. Unexpected is good, considering our circumstances." Thomas led the horses forward. "We need sanctuary for a few days." Josiah's shrewd eyes took in Catherine, then the direction from which they'd come. "Hargrove's men," Thomas nodded. "3 of them found my cabin. There'll be more." The old trapper spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Been waiting for someone to stand up to that snake." He gestured toward the cabin. "Well, come on then. Got venison stew on the fire and plenty of coffee." The cabin's interior was surprisingly cozy, clean, and well organized, with animal pelts covering the plank floor and walls adorned with hand-carved wooden implements. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, the stew pot bubbling fragrantly over the flames. "Sit, sit," Josiah urged, pulling out chairs at the rough-hewn table. "You look done in, both of you." As they ate the hearty stew, Thomas explained their situation. Josiah listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or frowning as the story unfolded. When Thomas finished, the old man leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "Hargrove's a problem, sure enough. Been pushing folks around these parts for too long." He stroked his beard. "But taking him down won't be easy, even with the lady's testimony." "We need more evidence," Thomas agreed. "Something concrete that even his paid judges can't ignore." Josiah's eyes twinkled with sudden mischief. "Might be I can help with that." He rose and crossed to a trunk in the corner, rummaging until he produced a leather-bound journal. "Been keeping track of Hargrove's doings for nigh on 2 years now. Dates, names, suspicious accidents. Old trappers see a lot that others miss." Thomas took the journal with reverence. "Josiah, this could be exactly what we need." The old man waved away his thanks. "Been waiting for the right time. Reckon it's come." He turned to Catherine with unexpected gentleness. "You're a brave woman standing against a man like Hargrove. Not many would." "I'm not sure bravery had much to do with it," Catherine admitted. "I just couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent." "That's the purest kind of courage," Josiah said approvingly. "Now, you two get some rest. I'll take first watch." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Catherine. She lay on a pallet near the fire, listening to the night sounds of the mountains filtering through the cabin walls. Thomas sat at the table, poring over Josiah's journal by lamplight, making occasional notes on a scrap of paper. After an hour of restless turning, Catherine rose and joined him, wincing as her ankle protested. "Find anything useful?" she asked softly. Thomas looked up, his face shadowed with fatigue and concern. "Plenty. Josiah's been more thorough than I imagined." He pushed the journal toward her. "Look at this pattern of accidents at independent mines that refuse to sell to Hargrove." Catherine scanned the neat entries, her heart sinking at the list of injuries and deaths. All these people, and no one's connected it before now. "Isolated incidents spread over time and distance," Thomas explained. "And Hargrove's careful, never uses the same men twice, pays off local law when necessary." His jaw tightened. "I should have seen it sooner." "You're seeing it now," Catherine reminded him, covering his hand with hers. "That's what matters." His fingers intertwined with hers, a gesture so natural neither of them seemed to notice at first. When they did, neither pulled away. "When this is over," Thomas said hesitantly, "what will you do? Return to Sacramento?" The question caught Catherine by surprise. She hadn't thought beyond survival and justice. "I don't know. There's nothing left for me there." She gazed into the dying embers of the fire. "My parents are gone. I was saving to open my own dressmaking shop, but those dreams seem very distant now." "They needn't be," Thomas said, his voice low and earnest. "Sierra City could use a skilled seamstress. And—" he paused, choosing his words carefully, "I find myself hoping you might consider staying." Catherine's heart quickened at the implication in his words, in the gentle pressure of his hand holding hers. "Thomas." A low whistle from outside interrupted her. Josiah signaling. Thomas was on his feet instantly, drawing his revolver. "Stay here," he ordered, moving silently to the window. Catherine held her breath as he peered cautiously through the glass. After a moment, his shoulders relaxed. "It's Marcus," he announced. "My deputy." Josiah escorted the young deputy inside. Marcus was disheveled and winded, having clearly ridden hard to find them. "Sheriff, we've got trouble," he reported without preamble. "Hargrove himself arrived in Sierra City with at least a dozen armed men. They're tearing the town apart looking for you and Miss O'Malley." "Anyone hurt?" Thomas demanded. "Not yet, but they're threatening to burn buildings if the town doesn't produce you by tomorrow noon." Marcus ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Mrs. Finch told me where to find you after they'd already searched your place. I rode out as soon as I could slip away." Thomas paced the small cabin, his expression thunderous. "Hargrove's getting desperate. That's good and bad." "How is it possibly good?" Catherine asked. "Desperate men make mistakes," Thomas explained. "And public threats like this will turn the townspeople against him. Hargrove's used to working from the shadows." "What's your plan, Sheriff?" Marcus asked. Thomas stopped pacing, determination hardening his features. "We end this. Tonight." "How?" Catherine stood to face him. "You can't simply ride into town against a dozen armed men." "No," Thomas agreed, "but we can set a trap." He turned to Josiah. "Your journal, plus Catherine's testimony, plus whatever evidence my contact at the newspaper has gathered it, should be enough to convince the federal marshal to act." "If we can reach him," Marcus pointed out. "There's a telegraph office in Northridge," Josiah interjected. 15 miles west. Operator there owes me for saving his boy from a mountain lion last spring." Thomas nodded decisively. "Marcus, you'll ride for Northridge now. Send everything we have to Marshal Collins in Sacramento." He scribbled a message on paper and handed it over. "Add that I'm invoking federal jurisdiction under suspicion of widespread corruption and criminal conspiracy." As Marcus prepared to leave, Thomas turned to Catherine. "I need you to stay here with Josiah." "No." The word came out more forcefully than she intended. "I won't hide while you put yourself in danger because of me. Catherine, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. This began with my testimony. It should end with it too." She stepped closer, her eyes locked with his. "You promised we'd face this together." Thomas's expression softened. "I did, didn't I?" he sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing with her. "Fine, but you stay close to me, and if things go badly, you run. Promise me that." "I promise," she agreed, relieved he wouldn't force her to stay behind. After Marcus departed for Northridge, they finalized their plan. Thomas, Catherine, and Josiah would return to Sierra City under cover of darkness. Using backtrails and the old trapper's intimate knowledge of the terrain, they could reach town undetected before dawn. "We'll hide at Widow Parker's boarding house," Thomas explained. "Her cellar connects to the old mining tunnels beneath the town. If necessary, we can move around unseen." "And then?" Catherine asked. "Then we wait for Marshal Collins. My message should bring him and his deputies as quickly as they can ride." Thomas checked and rechecked his weapons. "If Hargrove makes good on his threats before then, we'll have to improvise." They set out as a full moon rose over the mountains, casting silvery light on the trail. Josiah led the way, his knowledge of hidden paths proving invaluable as they descended toward Sierra City. They traveled in silence, each lost in thoughts of what morning might bring. For Catherine, the journey was a time of reflection. In the span of 2 days, her life had transformed completely. She had found allies willing to risk everything for justice. She had found a community worth fighting for. And in Thomas Dawson, she had found something unexpected, a man whose courage and compassion stirred emotions she had thought long buried after the hardships of recent years. As they rode side by side down a moonlit slope, Catherine studied his profile, etched in silver and shadow. Whatever happened tomorrow, she realized with sudden clarity, her heart was no longer entirely her own. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a strange sense of peace, even as they rode toward danger. Dawn was breaking as they reached the outskirts of Sierra City. The town lay quiet in the early morning light, smoke rising from a few chimneys but otherwise showing little sign of the occupation Marcus had described. Too quiet, Josiah muttered as they tethered their horses in a copse of trees. Thomas nodded grimly. They're waiting. Probably posted men at every entrance to town. They approached cautiously, using outbuildings and alleyways for cover. Josiah, moving with surprising stealth for a man his age, scouted ahead and returned with troubling news. Armed men at the hotel, the sheriff's office, and the saloon. Looks like they've taken over the main buildings. Spotted Hargrove himself on the hotel porch, drinking coffee like he owns the place. In his mind, he does, Thomas said darkly. Any sign of the townspeople, some being held in the church, others probably hiding in their homes. Josiah adjusted his shotgun. No way to reach the widow Parker's place without being seen. Thomas considered their options. We need a distraction. A slow smile spread across Josiah's weathered face. Leave that to me. You two circle around to the lumber mill. When you hear the commotion, make your run for the boarding house. Before Thomas could question him, the old trapper slipped away, vanishing into the shadows of early morning. Will he be all right? Catherine whispered as they moved toward the lumber mill at the eastern edge of town. Josiah's been outsmarting men and beasts in these mountains for 40 years, Thomas replied, though concern creased his brow. If anyone can create a distraction without getting caught, it's him. They waited in tense silence behind the lumber mill, watching the street for any sign of Hargrove's men. Minutes stretched like hours until a tremendous explosion shattered the morning calm. Smoke billowed from the direction of the livery stable, followed by the panicked whinnying of horses. Now. Thomas grabbed Catherine's hand, and they dashed across the street toward the boarding house as Hargrove's men ran toward the commotion. Widow Parker herself answered their urgent knock, ushering them inside without a word. She was a tiny woman with iron-gray hair and the stern countenance of someone who had weathered many storms. "About time you showed up, Sheriff," she said, bolting the door behind them. "These hooligans have been terrorizing my town since yesterday." "Your town, is it, Maud?" Thomas asked with a hint of amusement despite the dire circumstances. "Lived here 43 years. That gives me some claim." She led them to the kitchen and opened a trapdoor concealed beneath a rug. Cellars stocked with provisions, tunnel entrances behind the wine rack. As they descended into the cool darkness, shouts and more gunfire erupted outside. Thomas paused on the ladder. "Maud, be careful. If they come looking, I'll tell them I haven't seen you and don't want to," she finished for him. "Now go on. I've got bread in the oven." The cellar was larger than Catherine expected, with stone walls and a packed earth floor. Crates of supplies lined one wall, while a massive wine rack concealed the entrance to the mining tunnels Thomas had mentioned. "How long do we wait?" Catherine asked as Thomas lit a lamp. "Depends on how quickly Marshal Collins responds. Could be hours, could be days." He set the lamp on a barrel and ran a hand through his hair. "I hope Josiah got away safely." Catherine laid a comforting hand on his arm. "He seemed very capable. He is." Thomas covered her hand with his. "Still, I don't like involving others in my fights." "This isn't just your fight anymore," she reminded him gently. "It's all of ours now." Their eyes met in the lamplight, and for a moment the danger above them seemed to recede. Thomas's hand moved to her cheek, his touch feather-light, questioning. "Catherine," he began, his voice rough with emotion. A sudden pounding on the boarding house door jerked them back to reality. They froze, listening as Widow Parker's voice drifted down to them calm, annoyed, revealing nothing. "Of course I haven't seen the sheriff," they heard her snap. "And if I had, I wouldn't tell the likes of you. Now get off my porch before I fetch my shotgun." The exchange continued, but the heavy door held, and eventually the footsteps retreated. Thomas exhaled slowly. "Maud's formidable when roused. They'll think twice before bothering her again." "What now?" Catherine asked, trying to ignore the way her heart still raced from the interrupted moment between them. "Now we wait." Thomas moved to the wine rack and shifted it slightly, revealing a narrow tunnel entrance. "And prepare. These tunnels connect to most of the original buildings in town. If necessary, we can move around without being seen." The hours crept by with excruciating slowness. Thomas familiarized Catherine with the tunnel system using a rough map Widow Parker had provided. Occasionally, they heard movement above as customers visited the boarding house, but no one else came searching for them. Near midday, the trapdoor opened, and Widow Parker descended with a basket of food and news. "Hargrove's getting impatient," she reported, setting out bread, cheese, and cold meat. "He's called a town meeting at 2 o'clock. Says if you don't surrender by then, he'll start burning buildings, beginning with the school." Thomas's expression hardened. "He wouldn't dare, wouldn't he?" Maud challenged. "Man's desperate, Thomas. Word is his investors are pressuring him about delays in the mine consolidation. He needs to silence the girl and make an example of you." "Has there been any word from Northridge? Any sign of the marshal?" Catherine asked. Maud shook her head. "Telegraph lines were cut this morning. No messages in or out." Thomas slammed his fist against a crate in frustration. "He's isolating the town. We can't wait for Collins." "What will you do?" Maud asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "Face him." Thomas checked his revolver methodically. "I won't let him terrorize this town or harm innocent people because of me." "Because of us," Catherine corrected, her decision already made. "I'm coming with you." "Catherine, no, you need me," she insisted. "My testimony is what he fears. Together we might convince the townspeople to stand with us." Thomas looked as though he wanted to argue further but instead nodded reluctantly. "Together then, but we do this smart." He turned to Widow Parker. "Maud, I need you to spread the word quietly. Tell people I'm here and have proof of Hargrove's crimes. Ask them to be ready." "Ready for what?" Maud asked, her eyes narrowing. "To choose sides," Thomas replied grimly. As the appointed hour approached, Thomas and Catherine prepared to emerge from hiding. They had formulated a plan risky but with potential to turn the tables on Hargrove if enough townspeople supported them. "Remember," Thomas said as they prepared to leave the cellar, "stay behind me. If shooting starts, get to cover immediately." Catherine straightened the borrowed dress Widow Parker had provided. "I remember." She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "Thomas, if anything happens," he silenced her with a kiss swift but tender, filled with all the words they hadn't had time to say. "Nothing's going to happen," he promised against her lips. "We're going to finish this together." When they stepped into the afternoon sunlight, the town square was already filled with people. Hargrove stood on the steps of the hotel, surrounded by his armed men. He was older than Catherine had expected, in his 50s, with silver at his temples and a prosperous paunch beneath his expensive suit. He exuded an air of absolute authority, accustomed to having his every word obeyed without question. The crowd parted as Thomas and Catherine walked forward, surprise and relief washing over many faces at the sight of their sheriff. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. "William Hargrove," Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the square. "I believe you've been looking for us." Hargrove's expression shifted from momentary surprise to smug satisfaction. "Sheriff Dawson, how convenient of you to deliver yourself and the girl. Saves my men the trouble of hunting you down." "I'm not here to surrender," Thomas replied, standing tall in the center of the square with Catherine at his side. "I'm here to arrest you for the murder of James Cooper, for numerous acts of sabotage against independent miners, for attempted murder of Miss O'Malley, and for threatening the good people of Sierra City." A laugh rippled through Hargrove's men, but the mining magnate himself didn't smile. Bold accusations from a backwater sheriff with no jurisdiction over my business affairs. Where's your evidence? Right here. Thomas held up Josiah's journal. 2 years of documented accidents at mines that refused to sell to you, witnesses to your threats. Miss O'Malley's testimony that she overheard you ordering Cooper's murder. He scanned the crowd. And the testimony of your own men if they choose to save themselves by speaking the truth. Uncertainty flickered across several faces among Hargrove's hired guns. Thomas pressed his advantage. The federal marshal is already on his way, Hargrove. How many of your men will hang alongside you for murder? And how many might earn leniency by testifying against their employer? This is absurd, Hargrove blustered, but a vein pulsed visibly in his temple. I am a respected businessman bringing progress and prosperity to mining communities across California. This woman, he jabbed a finger at Catherine, is nothing but a thief who stole valuable documents from my office and is now spreading lies to cover her crimes. Catherine stepped forward, her voice clear and steady despite her fear. I have never set foot in your office, Mr. Hargrove. I was a seamstress at the Grand Hotel when I overheard you order James Cooper's death. You said, and I quote, "I don't care how you do it, just make sure Cooper disappears permanently." A murmur ran through the crowd. Hargrove's face darkened with rage. Preposterous! You have no proof. We have enough, Thomas replied calmly. Enough for the federal marshal to investigate thoroughly. Enough to freeze your assets pending that investigation. Enough to make your investors very, very nervous about their association with you. For the first time, uncertainty crept into Hargrove's expression. He turned to confer urgently with the scarred man at his side, the same one who had led the pursuit of Catherine. People of Sierra City, Thomas addressed the crowd while Hargrove was distracted. This man has threatened to burn your homes and businesses if you don't surrender 2 people seeking justice. Is this the kind of man you want controlling your town, your livelihoods, your future? No. Came a shout from the back. Josiah, very much alive and unharmed, pushed through the crowd with his shotgun in hand. I've watched this snake poison everything he touches for years. Time to drive him out. Others began to voice their agreement, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. Miners who had been pressured to sell their claims. Shopkeepers who had been threatened with boycotts if they didn't support Hargrove's interests. Families who had lost loved ones in suspicious accidents. Hargrove's men looked increasingly uncomfortable as the mood of the crowd shifted. Several backed away slightly, unwilling to face an angry town for their employer's sake. Enough, Hargrove roared, drawing a pistol from his coat. I will not be threatened by some self-righteous sheriff and a lying seamstress. He aimed directly at Catherine. You should have kept running, girl. Thomas moved with lightning speed, pushing Catherine aside as Hargrove fired. The bullet whizzed past, striking the ground where she had stood seconds before. Chaos erupted. Townspeople scattered for cover as Hargrove's remaining loyal men drew their weapons. Thomas fired back, hitting Hargrove in the shoulder and sending him stumbling backward. Get down, Thomas shouted to Catherine, pushing her toward the shelter of a nearby water trough. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Through the confusion, Catherine saw Josiah and several townsmen engaging Hargrove's gunmen from positions of cover. Deputy Marcus appeared from a side street with a group of armed citizens, having evidently returned from Northridge. The battle was brief but fierce. Outnumbered and facing unexpected resistance, Hargrove's men began to surrender or flee. The mining magnate himself, clutching his bleeding shoulder, tried to escape through the hotel, only to be cornered by Widow Parker wielding a cast iron skillet with deadly intent. "Not in my town," the elderly woman declared, delivering a blow that rendered Hargrove unconscious in an undignified heap. As the gunfire died away, Catherine emerged from cover to find Thomas directing the townspeople to secure the remaining gunmen. His shirt was torn and a graze along his temple leaked blood, but he was gloriously, wonderfully alive. "Is it over?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. Thomas turned at the sound of her voice, relief washing over his features. "Catherine." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, hands gently grasping her shoulders as if to reassure himself she was unharmed. "Are you hurt?" "No," she assured him, reaching up to touch the blood on his temple. "But you are. It's nothing." His eyes never left hers. "And yes, it's over. Marshal Collins and his deputies should be here by nightfall, according to Marcus. Hargrove will face federal charges for conspiracy, attempted murder, and likely much more once witnesses start coming forward." The townspeople were already celebrating their liberation, clapping Thomas on the back and treating Catherine with newfound respect as the story of her bravery spread. Josiah approached them, shotgun resting casually over one shoulder. "Not bad for a sheriff and a seamstress," the old trapper observed with twinkling eyes. "Reckon Sierra City owes you both a debt." "We all did our part," Thomas replied modestly, "including you and that distraction at the livery." Josiah cackled. "Just a little blasting powder in the right place." Horses weren't even in danger had the stable boy moved them out back first. As the excitement settled, Thomas turned to Catherine, a question in his eyes. "With Hargrove headed for prison, you'll be safe wherever you choose to go." He hesitated. "But I meant what I said before. Sierra City could use a good seamstress." Catherine felt the weight of possibility opening before her, a new beginning in this mountain town that had already begun to feel like home. "Is that the only reason you want me to stay?" she asked softly. Thomas reached for her hand, twining his fingers with hers. "No," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Not even close to the only reason." "Then I think," Catherine replied, stepping closer until she could feel the steady beat of his heart, "Sierra City might be exactly where I belong." 6 months later, Catherine stood in the doorway of her new shop on Sierra City's Main Street, watching as winter's first snow dusted the mountains surrounding the town. Catherine's fine tailoring, read the freshly painted sign above the door, the culmination of her long-deferred dream. The bell above the door jingled as Thomas entered, bringing a gust of cold air and the scent of pine with him. He had a habit of stopping by each evening as he completed his rounds, ostensibly to escort her home, though they both knew it was because he couldn't wait until supper time to see her. "Busy day?" he asked, removing his hat and dusting snow from its brim. 3 new dress orders for the Christmas social, and Mr. Henderson finally came in for his wedding suit fitting. Catherine smiled, setting aside the bodice she'd been embroidering. "How about you? Any trouble?" "Peaceful as can be," Thomas replied, moving behind the counter to kiss her properly. "Unless you count old man Wilson's mule getting loose again and eating Mrs. Peterson's washing off the line." Catherine laughed, the sound filling the cozy shop with warmth. In the months since Hargrove's arrest and subsequent conviction, Sierra City had flourished. The independent miners had formed a cooperative, ensuring fair prices for their ore. New businesses had opened, including Catherine's shop, which had quickly become popular for her skilled work and fashionable designs. "I finished something special today," she told him, reaching beneath the counter. "An early Christmas gift." Thomas accepted the package, unwrapping it carefully to reveal a handsome leather vest, expertly tooled and lined with silk. "Catherine, it's beautiful," he breathed, running his fingers over the intricate stitching. "Turn it over," she instructed. On the inside of the vest, near the heart, she had embroidered their initials intertwined with the date they had first met, the day he had fired a warning shot and taken her hand in the forest. "So you'll always carry a piece of me close to your heart," she explained, suddenly shy despite the months they'd spent building their relationship. Thomas looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I was planning to wait until Christmas Eve, but—" He reached into his pocket and knelt before her, producing a simple gold ring with a small, perfect diamond. "I've been carrying this close to my heart for weeks now. Catherine O'Malley, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up inside her like a mountain spring. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Thomas Dawson, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, spinning her in a circle until they were both laughing breathlessly. Later that evening, they shared their news at the weekly community supper at the hotel. Cheers erupted throughout the dining room, glasses raised in toast to the sheriff and the seamstress whose courage had freed their town from Hargrove's shadow. Josiah, who had become a regular visitor to town since the confrontation, thumped Thomas on the back with enough force to make him stagger. "About time, Sheriff. Was beginning to think I'd need to give you another push." Mrs. Finch dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. "Sarah would have loved her," she sniffled to Widow Parker. "Just the kind of daughter-in-law she always wanted for him." As the celebration continued around them, Thomas led Catherine out onto the hotel's porch, where they could have a moment alone beneath the star-filled sky. Snowflakes danced in the lantern light, settling on Catherine's hair like a crown of tiny diamonds. "Happy?" Thomas asked, wrapping his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "If someone had told me 6 months ago that fleeing for my life would lead to all this." She gestured toward the warm lights of the town, the shop that was hers, the ring glittering on her finger. "I never would have believed them." "Sometimes the darkest moments lead us exactly where we need to be," Thomas mused, drawing her closer against the chill. Catherine rested her head against his shoulder, thinking of all they had overcome and all that lay ahead. Spring would bring their wedding, with wildflowers carpeting the mountainsides. Summer would see the completion of the house Thomas was building for them near the stream where he'd grown up. And beyond that, perhaps children to fill that house with laughter. "I love you, Thomas Dawson," she said simply, the words carrying all her gratitude for the man who had fired a warning shot to save her and, in doing so, had given her a new life, a new home, and a love she had never dared to dream of finding. He kissed her tenderly beneath the falling snow, the promise of their future warm between them. "And I love you, Catherine O'Malley, soon to be Dawson," he replied. "From the moment you came crashing into my forest, I think I was yours." Above them, the stars of the Sierra Nevada winter sky blazed with timeless light, bearing witness to a love born of courage and justice in the wild heart of the West, a love that had begun with a gunshot and a hand extended in the wilderness, and would endure long after the last echo of that shot had faded from memory.